right, we got the last talk of the day coming up now. So this is how B2B marketers are reaching and influencing the millennial buyer. Fireside chat led by Vinay Bhagat, CEO at Trust Radius. So I'll hand it over to you, Vinay.
Thank you, Troy. Hello, everyone. Delighted to be with you here today. And joining me in this discussion is Rowan Tonkin, CMO of Planful. Rowan, why don't you say a few words just to introduce your background?
Yeah, thanks, Vinay. Hi, everyone. Rowan Tonkin. Prior to becoming a CMO, I actually led demand gen and revenue operations at a company, big data analytics company called OmniSci. Spent some time at Anaplan in product marketing, and prior to that was actually in pre-sales selling marketing planning software. So have been in the technology space for around 15 years and very much in and around the marketing space for that whole time too. So really excited to be here and excited to talk to everyone.
And always a pleasure speaking with you, Rowan. You bring a lot of insights and terrific experience. So delighted to have you with me on this session today. So to kick off, what we're going to open with is really the demographics of buyers today and some data that sort of maybe defines how they behave. And then we're going to hear about how Rowan sort of views marketing to this new generation of buyers and how to adapt his strategy. So first up, just to set the stage, 60% of today's enterprise technology buyers are millennials, and there's a healthy group of Gen Zers also growing into the mix as well. And what we found in our research, each year we do a survey of 1,000 B2B tech buyers. One of the things we try and understand is how do different cohorts by generation behave? And lo and behold, different generations behave differently in terms of how they evaluate software. Millennials, the focus of today, are much more likely than older generations to begin their journey with search. And they're much less likely to use traditional sources like analyst reports or prior experience to make a product selection. In general, across the universe of modern buyers today, we find a trend towards self-education or self-nurture, as some people call it. This is data from the consulting firm Bain & Company, who found that 94% of prospects are fully or somewhat informed before they contact a vendor. And 3/4 of them want to wait until they're in the evaluation stage and they complete all of their discovery, identification of shortlisted vendors, through online resources or talking to peers. And when we look at the sources that they use by stage, again, data from Bain, self-realized sources are the most important. So they use web search, they use word of mouth very, very heavily. The black bar there, 58 and 57 respectively, indicates the role of word of mouth. That could be going online to find word of mouth, or it could also be just tapping into one's personal network. So there's no doubt that the data suggests that buying behavior has changed. Rowan, when you and I were prepping for this session, you kind of used the term, the buyer is in control. Can you just elaborate on what you mean by that?
Well, I think it's pretty self-evident by this data that you're presenting here, Vinay, is, there's a lot of talk out there around, dark social, dark funnels, dark this, dark that. And the only person that's in the dark is us, the vendor, the marketer, the seller, right? The buyer's not in the dark about where they are in their process and their journey and what they need to do. They're actually very much in control. And there's a few reasons for that. I think as buyers, and I can certainly qualify myself into this millennial buying category, and I'm qualified to speak on it because I am one. But I think just the modern buyer, if you will, they certainly understand how time intensive it is to go and make really important and high priority investment decisions. And that could be simply a decision about a piece of technology or a product that they need to buy, but they know how long it's going to take. And so they want to actually do research, be well informed before they actually get into that buying process, like true buying process. And so what they're ultimately doing is taking back that control and saying, hey, I'm not willing to give up my time until I'm ready to commit to the time that's required to make that a priority. And so that's why I think the buyer is in control. And that's the challenge for us as marketers and sellers, is how do we get visibility into that buyer's specific journey and where they're at as much as we possibly can.
What are the sources you believe that they use? Which sources do they trust the most when it comes to shortlist identification, validation, and research in those early phases?
Yeah, it depends on the market. But firstly, most people look to who do they trust first and foremost. And trust is something that you have to earn, and it's built over time. And so generally that might be a trusted community of folks, trusted individuals, a peer network that they may have, and that may be a specific peer community. There's plenty of them out there right now. But they'll firstly go there. They'll also look, what are my peers using? What are my competitors using? Or what are my competitors doing in this space? And then finally, they'll look at other trusted areas, and that could be industry publications or industry knowledge. And ultimately, they'll use that to form, okay, I understand a little bit more about what I need to go and do or what I'm looking to do. And so more newer channels for that type of thing is the things like podcasts. Obviously, search is hugely important, but I think search actually comes second once the vendor has, or once the buyer has gone and looked at, hey, I've heard all of this influence. Now let me go and take that insight and create my own personal hypothesis about what I need to do.
So how are you evolving your marketing strategy to reach this new modern buyer? I think you alluded to podcasts as being sort of a strategy, but tell us a little bit more about the toolkit that you're using.
Yeah, so you have to use a blend of things. There's no magic solution to any of this. There's we think about it from a classic Schwarzer stage of awareness. Like, who is aware that they have a problem? Where are they within that stage? You've got, for us, we've got a lot of buyers out there that don't know that some of this technology exists, and then you've got a huge amount of seasoned buyers. And so that you've got to market to them in two different ways. Firstly, we also think very much about the persona. We market to a group that are very, what we call digitally native or modern buyers. And that's where we're looking to build trust over time. So things like having a great content engine, great content machine, building in social proof, that's customer stories, that's review programs, that's strong analyst programs, but then also trying to build trust through our own engines, like a podcast, right? There's nothing that builds trust more than hearing, from other customers, from other peers, and us hosting the conversation. That's all we're really doing in that kind of type of space, is just hosting a conversation, but naturally that builds trust with the buyer.
One of the things that's really evident in this data, again, is the role of word of mouth. And again, that can come through people sort of tapping their own peer network. It could be through review platforms. It could also be through you facilitating conversations between customers and prospects, or, podcasts and so forth. But when you think about customer voice as a pillar in your strategy, how central and important is it, and what sort of are the full gamut of tactics that you're using to activate voice of customer?
Yeah, it's hugely important to certainly our strategy, and I think it should be to most people's strategy. It's classic social proof. People want to buy from people that they certainly like, that represent them, that feel and look like them, and are in a similar position. And that is really, really important. Then the best way to demonstrate that is not by trust us. It's let us show you who has been on this journey, customers like you, buyers like you, people like you have done this. This is a well-trodden path. This is something that you can do yourself. And so social proof just becomes critical to that, not only at the, like the true purchasing stage and evaluation stage, but even at discovery stage, people want to know at that point in time, how is this going to look? What is this going to be? I want to have a plan. And so using social proof to do that is absolutely critical.
How do independent communities like review platforms fit into your marketing strategy?
They play a really important part of our strategy. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, they're always on. And that means that, when someone is doing their research, and unfortunately for us, that's just not at 9 to 5. I do a lot of my buying research while my wife is watching something on TV that I don't like, right? I'm looking at stuff when I'm, on a train back when I used to commute, when I'm, in an airport. I'm looking at different things at those times, and that's maybe not necessarily when we have sales teams activated or chatbots activated or things like that. And so when I'm doing that, I may not be able to talk to my community, right? Whether that's a Slack community, whether that's a community on all the community platforms that exist. And so what I might want to do then is go and look at, okay, what are the trails? What are the breadcrumbs that have been left behind new sites? Obviously, they all have their different purposes, and how you manage that review program as a vendor is really important. But they play a crucial part because you're able to use that in your own ways. Take a review and publish that, promote that digitally, and then you're also able to use it as just always on activity, linking back to it from your own content, from your own places, embedding it in press releases, doing things like that. Is really fundamental to the way that we activate social proof.
How many platforms do you seriously work with at this point?
4.
One of the things that we've seen progressive vendors like yourself do is adapt to working with more than one platform. And what we've seen in our data, at least, is while different review platforms, to your point, Rowan, excel at different things and have different purposes, a big reason for working with more than one platform, sometimes as many as 3 or 4, is audience reach. Just looking at our own data at Trust Radius, we serve about 1 million technology buyers a month. It's concentrated in a more finite number of categories than, say, a site like a Capterra or a G2. But we find that only 20% of our audience uses G2, 5% uses IT Central Station, 14% Capterra, and 10% Gartner Peer Insights. So the reality is, as a marketer, you have to embrace this reality that your buyers are going to be using different sites. And, maybe it's not 4 in all instances, maybe it's 2 or 3, but you're going to have to pick more than one platform to spend your energy. How do you manage working with 4 sites?
It's certainly not easy. And that's the thing that I would say is, like, it's absolutely resource intensive, and you have to be very thoughtful. And what I talk to my team about is programmatic about that. Because firstly, just garnering the reviews from your customers is very difficult, right? It's not the world's easiest thing to go and ask, all of your customers to write a review. You also, it's great that they can review in lots of places, but you're also not in control of where they specifically review, right? You're kind of pointing them and leading the way in some instances. So you could maybe not be working with a specific review platform, and next thing you know, you've got 5 reviews on there because that's where the customer chose to leave their review for no other reason. And then you're kind of like, whoa, now I need to kind of engage this because I might need to bolster the content there, or I really want to promote the content that a customer has left there. So managing that is not easy. We try and put a programmatic approach into it, which is a lot of leveraging our product and leveraging our communication technologies to review across platforms, because it's really the consistency of reviews. And then, on the flip side, as the vendor, as the seller in some aspects, you don't have any control of where that buyer ends up, right? And so you're kind of making a bet. If you only have a single review site strategy, you're making a bet that you picked the right one and that you're comfortable in either not appearing or appearing in a different way on other review sites. So having that that multi-review site strategy and putting in that effort ensures that you're kind of appearing across those multiple platforms, which reinforces the social proof that I was talking about. And that's why being on multiple sites, I think, is really important, because it reinforces, you know, if I'm appearing really well on Trust Radius and then maybe I'm appearing terribly somewhere else, that's going to create doubt and uncertainty in the buyer's mind. They're going to have a little bit of uncertainty about, okay, well, which one do I trust? Whereas if you're able to you know, everything looks consistent and matches, then you're not creating any doubt, and you know, it all appears well.
Amongst those platforms, why did you choose to prioritize working with Trust Radius specifically?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different reasons. One, I know the depth of review and the process that goes through, I think is richer. And again, so part of the review site strategy means where do you want certain reviews to go? Like, and again, you're not necessarily in control, you're just trying to influence. But the depth there is really important. You might get really high volumes with another vendor. You might get, you know, for example, Gartner, that's part of their Magic Quadrant process. So you know that you're going to get certain numbers of reviews there. And so within one of our decisions from Trust Radius was firstly the data that we get back, the depth of the review that we get, and our ability to kind of really reshare that and embed that throughout our website.
Fantastic. One of the things that we've learned in our buyer research is that there's often a disconnect between how vendors think about what's most important and what buyers think about. In our annual survey of buyers and sellers, buyers categorically state that while they care about the score of a product, and they'll probably eliminate you if you have a terrible score and shortlist you maybe if you've got an awesome score, they're not going to pick a product ultimately on a score. They recognize there's nuance, and cheap SMB solutions might outscore a more complex enterprise products because it's just simple and cheap. Or they recognize that on some sites it's kind of easy to manipulate scores by cherry picking who you have right reviews. So what buyers really care about is what is actually said in the body of a review. If you're picking a product that has some nuance to how it supports a particular use case, we found in our research that people really do care about the content. They don't ignore the score, but they do care a lot about the content. I guess as a marketer, how do you react to this data?
Yeah, well, actually, let me flip that as a buyer. So I think, you know, when I go and buy technology, or my team come to me with, you know, recommendations for buying technology, one thing that I always am wary of is, well, you know, we picked this tool because a lot of other people had it. And what I'm really trying to understand there is, what was that company's intent and what was their outcome? And you can only really glean that, not from the score. You know, if the score is bad, you can assume the outcome was bad. But if the score was high, it's like, well, okay, what was the intent? Like, did it achieve its objective? And, you know, all of us vendors, and as a buyer, all of the, you know, everyone's trying to sell an ROI and sell a value proposition. And I just want to make sure our intent for leveraging software matches the outcome and the intent that that buyer was going through when they made their decision or their recommendation to review it. Because if their intent was different and their outcome was great, that's great for them. But if my intent is very different, that review, even though it may be high, is not necessarily useful to me, because they have a different plan for that system, and that we might already have a piece of software that does that or something like that. So that's generally how I try and approach it as a buyer, is looking at what's the intent and what's the outcome that that organization, that buyer, that person was seeking, and did we get that? And therefore, as a vendor, I take that thinking and I'm like, okay, well, how do I get someone to say, hey, we wanted to do X, Y, and Z with this, and we saw, you know, A, B, and C results?
Yeah. So in our research with buyers, one of the most important questions we get them to answer is they want to see answered by their peers is, what was that person's use case, right? Because again, a product can be really great and score really well, but if it's a mismatch for your use case and your scenario, not going to work. So that's a critical question. To your other point, people really want to know about outcomes, ROI, other forms of outcomes, and they want just a quick scannable view of what's great and what needs improvement as well. And so those are the essence of things that we see buyers seeking in their reviews, and why we think in your portfolio of review strategies, it's so important to be able to serve up this type of content to buyers through a public review forum. The other thing that we believe strongly in is that customers can help you support your claims. So if you have a certain differentiation narrative you're trying to espouse in the marketplace, and let's face it, a lot of buyers say vendor websites kind of sound the same, and it's really hard as a buyer to discern the differences between one product and another product based upon what vendors have to say sometimes. What they're really looking for is what the customers have to say. So I'd love to just hear your perspective in terms of how important it is to have customer voice that actually supports you.
Yeah, it comes back to the social proof, right? If we're making claims about our product and our capabilities and the value proposition that we provide, and we can't back them up with anything other than our own claims, then you don't have any trust. And buyers are too educated and too smart these days to take you at your word. And they're looking for ways to validate what you're saying is true. If you only leave them with your impression, you're not really going to necessarily create that real element of trust that you're looking for. However, if you're able to, this is why reference programs exist and why customers want to do reference calls, right? If you're able to do that up front with a lot of the social proof and say, hey, don't take it from us, take it from these customers, and here's the specifics about what they like. And this is actually, a good salesperson, a good solution consultant will say, you told us you're looking for these things. Here's what other customers have said about those three things that you're looking for. That's hugely valuable. And then from the back end, on the back end of a sales cycle, you're able to, in some cases, save yourself a few references. And that's often huge for your sales team and your sales velocity too, because using that up front may allow you to minimize some of your reference program needs.
Now, you've used the term social proof a lot so far in this session. What I found is that oftentimes marketing teams think in silos. They've got their customer review presence, which either, again, in the case of Pure Insights, is feeding the MQ, or in the case of most review forums, is feeding your online reputation. But seldom do they think about the customer review strategy really fueling their own internal social proof strategy. And as you've indicated, you've got a lot of your own channels of go-to-market, whether that's sales-led or marketing-led. The Bain data suggests that people are spending material time on brands' websites as well as third-party forums as part of their evaluation process. So talk to us about how you're using customer voice, specifically customer voice from reviews in your own channels.
Yeah, so we're using it across our website. We're using it in our sales channel. So our direct sales team are using quotes and assertions inside of their sales decks. We're using it in advertising programs, even in things like in the podcast, right? Topics and themes that emerge as conversational elements, I actually pick up from listening to recorded customer calls, for example, and that's taking social proof and customer voice, from listening to implementation calls, listening to a discovery call with an SDR, and using that as saying, I'm hearing a lot of these things. What's your perspective on this to a podcast audience member or guest? And then also then turning that in, onto our website, into review snippets, putting that in case studies and again, using it for reference program outreach as well. So there's a lot there. It comes back, you talked about it, what are our claims? What are our differentiators we're making in the market? Having content themes that align to that, and then ultimately trying to reinforce that, and with a lot of social proof from wherever you can get it. And review sites are a great place.
One of the things that your team has proliferated on your website is these sort of review carousels or widgets, where your team is curating content from your Trust Radius reviews, building a content library, and then creating these dynamic feeds. So you've got a number of use cases as a business, like, building your annual operating plan. And what your team has very successfully done is then feed relevant content to each of those landing pages. So I thought that was a pretty cool strategy.
Yeah, it's really important to us. As we said before, the intent, solving my annual operating plan is one intent, and people want to see, hey, how did this person do it? So making that nuanced differentiation is really important.
Yeah, context matters, right? So if I'm there with the intent to understand about how to build an operating plan versus another aspect of the financial planning process, I'd love to hear quotes that are pertinent to the context. And frankly, another strategy we see brands do is creating compete pages where you've got contextualized social proof as well, where it actually names, who else was being evaluated in their purchase cycle, etc. Now, one of the things that is a consequence of millennial buyers being so independent and in control, and you used the term earlier that some ABM platforms in our space have coined, you're in the dark for a lot of their journey. And while you want to, create content that engages them and that's compelling while they're doing that self-education, you also ideally want to know who's doing that evaluation, right? And in many cases, it's hard to understand. So talk to me a little bit about kind of your journey to use buyer intent data, how it fits into your marketing strategy.
Well, yeah, I mean, having come from a big data company prior to this, you realize how important and how many digital signals are left across all sorts of places. We have an aggregated intent score for all of our buyers and accounts that come from many different signals of intent. And that not only helps us understand what stage a particular organization is at, but how intense or how high their intent levels are. Because some signals may show high intent in the purchasing phase, but some people may still be off doing discovery. And that helps you get a little more multi-threaded. If you feel like you're in the purchasing cycle of the buying journey with that particular customer, and you see that same account has got a whole bunch of discovery going on, what's likely happening there is there's a part of the buying group that doesn't feel brought along, and they're off doing, they're left behind. So how does a rep go and get multi-threaded and bring that group along? So really important to have multiple, for us, certainly multiple signals of intent coming in that are fed and analyzed and really evaluated so that you can actually make them actionable. That's the challenge with intent data, is like, how do you actually turn it into something?
So just unpacking what you said there, it's important to have more than one source of intent, to triangulate, right? If you've got signals coming from two sources, maybe that, means that it's real signal, not noise. And then B, different intent signals may be commensurate with different stages of the buyer's journey. Roughly speaking, how many different intent sources do you use today?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I'm sure all the ABM vendors are harnessing other sources of intent that I don't know about too.
Yeah.
So, I know there's probably, we have 3 different vendors feeding into our data and contacts, but behind those walls, there's probably 20 to 30, I'm sure. When you think about contact data platforms, they're probably harnessing 30 to 40 different intent signals from across the web that they're then creating their own version of too. So, there would be potentially hundreds, but it comes to us in 3 pipes.
Interesting. Now, one of the sources of intent that your team has started to use in the last year has been intent data from Trust Radius, from people reading your reviews, comparing you to other products, researching your category at large, but also researching competitive products and maybe omitting you from their purchase cycle initially. So you have the opportunity to make sure you're not missing out on deals and to broaden your aperture. Talk to us about how your team is using kind of review platform intent data, Trust Radius specific intent data in your demand generation strategy.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, it would be wrong to assume that we're in every deal that goes down in every region, in our focus areas. So, as a marketing department, it's our job to try and make sure we're at the table for as many opportunities as we possibly can. So when you think about that, you then have to say to yourself, okay, well, which ones are we not in? Obviously, I'm doing my job when I'm getting folks to the table. Sales obviously then need to do their job. But, who are we not getting to? Doing some reverse engineering about that, using the intent data to say, well, what are those types of companies? Where are they? Who are they? What's the pattern? Is there a persona difference? So that's certainly one source to certainly understand our go-to-market strategy effectiveness. Then secondly, once you have that information, it's like, well, I can do something with it. I can try and get myself to the table at that point. At what cost is an efficiency question, depending on how much marketing spend you have. But for us, we see that as an opportunity to create some brand awareness in a buying cycle and hopefully get to the table by reinforcing that, hey, this is a well-trodden path with us. Lots of companies just like you have made this decision, have done this. Bring us into the table and into the conversation. And that definitely works. It's a harder sales cycle, of course, because you're not in the early stages, but it certainly gets you into the conversation and creates an ability to influence, and you still win some of those deals. So it's very cost effective.
One of the things that I really love about how your team has approached this is that you're using social proof along the journey from ad to landing page here as well. It's maybe small to see, but if you look at that ad on the right there, you've got your top rated badge. You've also got a quote. And so, if you're going to market to an audience that comes from a specific review platform like Trust Radius, those people have come from that site. And they have trust in that site, and they are also clearly looking for social proof. So reinforcing, especially in the scenario where maybe you're not in the initial consideration set for that buyer, again, your social proof, your customer validation is absolutely critical. We worked with a company in the customer success space who found a 10x higher response rate on their ads by incorporating social proof onto the ad versus not. So really can make a very meaningful difference. And what Rowan's team have also done is make sure they carry that experience onto the landing page where the review carousel, the review widget sits there as well. So in macro terms, what the buyer intent has allowed Planful to do is to focus their advertising on people who are in market. So instead of trying to cast a massively wide net to the universe of everyone who's in their ideal customer profile, you can concentrate your ad spend to the people who are actively shopping and then try and optimize your engagement with them. Now let's talk about some of the outcomes that you achieved with this campaign, because the numbers seem pretty awesome, but would love to just hear from you, what your team is sort of really focused on when you look at, this type of buyer intent led data.
Yeah. I mean, these sorts of numbers are all fantastic, and I'll let people read them here. I think the ones that probably aren't here are our pipeline and sales results numbers. It's fair to say that our pipeline conversion, so simply of the pipeline we create, how much of that do we win and close? Well, that's increased by 60% year over year, which is a huge result for us. So conversion rates have increased. So therefore, if you wind that back, the strategy of targeting these people that are in their buying stages, and as we talked about, this whole conversation is about the millennial buyer and how they buy. Participating in the way of how they buy has helped our pipeline conversion rates. And then secondly, that results in close won revenue results, which we'll be announcing via press release next week. So I won't give away too much, but really, really impressive performance from the whole business, from our sales team, from our marketing team. At a very micro level, these results in terms of the target accounts that our reps are going after, we're able to convert those better. We've increased the deals that we're at the table in significantly year over year, and ultimately creating a much better performance for our business. That's great, but really helping to transform the lives of FP&A professionals and accounting professionals. And actually, for those of us that all work with FP&A, like when they're functioning and high performing, it makes our lives easier. We don't have finance scorekeepers on our backs. We've got business partners, and that's what we're trying to solve, really.
Fantastic. It's fantastic to hear about that growth and pipeline conversion and just the scaling of the pipeline, as well as you pointed out, seeing more deals, right? That's the holy grail for sales, is to be in as many deals as possible and have as high a chance of winning because you've done a good job of pre-marketing to those people and influencing them in that kind of early discovery phase. So fantastic to hear. Great job. Just to kind of recap the theme of what we've talked about here today, it's very clear that the world of buying in B2B has transformed. The buyer is clearly in control. They're educated. They're doing their own research. They don't want to be sold to. They want to be educated. You need to think about your content strategy, whether that's the podcast strategy that Rowan is talking about, your third-party review presence, your own SEO. And, to me, the data is unequivocal that you need to have a centralized strategy focusing on activating the voice of your customers in a world where word of mouth is so critical across the buyer's journey, but particularly in those first couple of phases of discovery and evaluation, activating your customers to build your presence on the small handful of review platforms that matter, building social proof into your own channels, and then harnessing that social proof in your demand gen strategy to optimize conversion is super important in a world where you are in the dark, unfortunately, for a good portion of the buyer's journey, where they're completing a good portion of their research without being known to you. Having methods to identify who those people are, buying data from multiple sources and correlating those to figure out who you should be targeting obviously has phenomenal results. So those are my closing thoughts. But Rowan, would you like to add any closing thoughts before we turn to questions?
No, not specifically. I think you covered it all there. I think really just sit back and evaluate, from a psychology perspective, how you buy, how you want to buy, and how you want to participate in that process, and create an aligned buyer and vendor journey. Creates the outcomes that you're looking for, because when you do that, you can then increase your pipeline conversion rates. You do create the winnable pipeline that your sales organization is looking for, and you can get off the hamster wheel in some cases of how you're marketing to your customers.
So at this point, we'd love to just take any questions from the audience.
Feel free to submit them in the comments. I think that's the way that we would go here. I don't see a question Q&A panel, so submit them in the comments if you're looking for some. Maybe
while we're waiting for questions, something that's often on people's minds is, how do you organize your team to achieve these sort of amazing results? So do you have a customer marketing function that's sort of driving the activation of the customers and the reviews for you? Do you have specialists who understand how to use intent data? How have you organized your team to kind of achieve these great outcomes?
Yeah, so team is structured in a few different pillars. So first pillar is corporate and brand. The second pillar is our revenue marketing team, which includes field marketing, demand generation, and customer marketing. So really important distinction there. Customer marketing sits inside revenue marketing. And we then have product marketing and then marketing and revenue operations. So I have all of revenue operations, including sales and deal desk reporting into me. From the intent data and management side, I'm very thankful to have an amazing marketing operations team. when I talk to other teams, it's like, we're never scared to push vendors to to implement faster than they normally say is possible, and that's because of our marketing ops team. And I'm really thankful that we have a great technology stack and a great team that run and manage that, and we're always looking to optimize.
We have a question that was just submitted. You mentioned you've implemented 4 customer review platforms. Besides TrustRadius, what are the other review platforms you've implemented and why?
Yeah, so we certainly leverage G2. So that's the G2 is slightly different, a little bit less control than, say, TrustRadius, but really important because they do have a high number of visitors to their site as well, and they do seem to get a lot of reviews. So really important there. One of the things that all of these review vendors do is they give you little badges and little awards, and they do that season over season and year after year. And they're really helpful from a consumer psychology perspective. There's a reason we all love trophies. It's because, you've won something. And so being able to leverage those, you saw in some of the things Vinay shared there, our advertising has some of those awards and some of those badges. And if you can get that across multiple platforms, it's just, psychologically really great validation for a buyer. We also have Gartner Peer Insights. There's say what you want about Gartner, but there's a lot of people that really trust them and have accounts with Gartner, and they trust their analysts, and they go to their analysts, and the analysts will send them to the peer review site. And it's part of Magic Quadrant processes. So, reviewers are asked to submit in Peer Insights as part of the Magic Quadrant reviews. We have Magic Quadrants with Gartner, so we leverage that as well. And I can't remember, honestly, the 4th one. I know the team know about it. But the other place that I would say, depending on your business, is leverage Google. Google loves Google. So if you can get really good results on Google's review platform, depending on the type of business, I would go there too. I know my wife's business, which is a weddings business, uses Google heavily, and it's great for SEO. So think about that too.
Speaking of leveraging Google, I mean, one of the things I think is critical is, again, how you optimize your own organic search strategy. We're starting to work with a lot of brands now who are actually doing such a good job of tuning their SEO that they're competing with third-party platforms for attention on keywords like category search terms or competitive terms and so forth. And one of the ways they're doing that is actually incorporating customer reviews into those kind of key Google landing pages, because all of the content that gets syndicated is crawled by the Google search engine, helps you rank on more keywords, helps you improve engagement on the page, which is a positive signal to Google. So don't think of this strategy as just a third-party strategy. Think about it as your own internal discoverability strategy. And again, as Rowan's pointed out, social proof in your own channels is immensely important here as well in the mix. I think that brings us to the end of the session. Rowan, thank you so much for joining me here today, and really appreciated everyone's attention, and Rowan generously sharing his insights. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Vinay. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your afternoon and a great week ahead.
Yeah, thank you both, Vinay and Rowan. We really appreciate all the insights here. And yeah, thank you to the audience. We appreciate all your time, and we hope it was valuable content for you today. Our next marketing event is going to be April 13th, and that will be a hybrid event. So keep a lookout. We'll be sending you emails about details as that comes up. So yeah, until then, thank you all. We'll be signing off.